every way, really, any and every way. I mean, some of the best experiences I had was even here, I had a little brother in town, Tavon Green, and just this amazing experience of spending 5 years in his life, and how much he affected me, how much I affected him, and how much it informed what I wanted to do professionally. There's so many ways to be of service, and I know you know dozens of them, and I have a feeling just if you have that yearning, and by the way, I always call my second year of law school here my dark year, because I knew I wanted to do something, I didn't know what it was, and as finally I decided I was just going to dive in someplace and find a way. And I thought I was going to be doing a nonprofit lawyer, and I thought I was going to be with the Urban Justice Center for years, and that was it. And I had dreams of people like Jeffrey Canada, who runs the Harlem's Children's Zone, who's like one of my favorite ideals, back in the Reedland Center. But it's amazing where life takes you if you're willing to take that leap. And so I just say find something and dive in. It might not be what you end up doing, but there's definitely so many ways of being of service and leveraging your affluence, leveraging your education. All right.
My name is Susan Young. I'm an undergraduate from Harvard. Thank you again for speaking and inspiring us with your words. I wanted to ask you, as someone who's worked both outside the machine of the government and within as a politician and for legal advocacy, which you find, or what differences you see between them in terms of affecting change in the community, and maybe where in the future change might happen?
They're both so essential. I loved being out of government, and, because things were often clearer for me there. Every day I'm examining my own moral compass, because there's so many forces that work to erode it within a political sphere, and it's very difficult work, but it is very rewarding. And I can set priorities in many ways. There are a lot of nonprofits in New York that I can help guide through now having a sort of benevolent leadership inside City Hall. But there are trade-offs for both. It depends on what your passion is. I have some friends that work for legal services in Newark, and they do phenomenal work, and I'm constantly calling them on the phone, sending people to them, and they're standing up and doing great work. And I revere what they're doing. They sometimes have some frustrations that they're not doing the kind of systemic change that they would like. There's a great organization, I see somebody in this room that's had some affiliation with it, called the Institute for Social Justice in Newark. There's a fellow classmate of mine named Nancy Fishman who's doing phenomenal work there. They're focusing on prisoner reentry issues, and I'm realizing now that they can't do it alone, nor can I, but we need each other. So it's almost about finding where you're most comfortable. But I'll be so frank with you. In the year I graduated, when people started coming to me and talking about running for a central ward councilman, I really resisted it. And I remember having so many nights where I would just say I wasn't going to do it, I didn't want to do it. And there's a lot of things I hate about politics. And one of them is just my own, self-image. Before I was a politician, if I held somebody across the street, I was doing a good deed. Now I'm trying to get a vote. And so there's lots of things that I don't like about the job. So anything you pick, there's going to be trade-offs. And if you're interested in government, Newark is a good place to go. Yes?
Hi, again, thank you for speaking to us. I was a Lyman Fellow when I was an undergraduate, but now I'm a reporter for the Star-Ledger.
Drats! I'm trying to remember what the hell I saw it said. So,
New York's not my beat. But I did have two questions, two-part question. The first is, the Star-Ledger regularly covers the gang violence in Newark, and I wondered what you thought of the coverage of the gang violence and how you think it's either helped or hurt the situation. And number two, you thought there were stories about what's going on in Newark, your mission, your work, what's going on in the street that the paper isn't covering.
I can give a lecture on the media, how I've been burned over my life. As far as the gang violence is concerned, I sat with Wilsey recently, and he said his number one story this year, the main thing to focus on is murder. And I'm very encouraged by where we're going. We took a city that was one of its peaks of murder, and in 6 months now we've lowered the murder rate about 17%. In the last 28 days, about 30 to 40%. So we're starting to see a decline. And overall violent crime are down even more. There's about a 40% reduction in people being shot. So there's a whole aspect of the stories of what are we doing that's different. And I can give a long lecture. When I inherited the police department, as you probably know from reading the paper, it was in shambles, the buildings were falling apart, people were working like Barney Miller on typewriters, taking 2 or 3 hours to do a simple form, thus taking them off the streets. The police department, if anybody saw the street fight, was used politically to repress people. And those people were interested in fair elections in the state of New Jersey. I mean, Newark was used to be a place where people read article pieces on what was going on to repress the vote. So I think their coverage is good, but I think there's a story beyond the actual bleeding and bloodshed and policing. And it's a story that has to be told. And I'm working with Shuki and trying to get them to see the fuller story. Because I think the violence itself is not the problem, it's a manifestation or a symptom of a larger problem and the sickness in our community. And there are issues. I think it's violence when a kid goes to school for 8 years and only gets 3 years worth of education. I think it's violence that children grow up in, like they have endured for many years, and the elevated lead levels in kids' blood, which is directly correlated with learning disabilities as high as it is. I think it's violence when you have parents who have to work in the state of New Jersey. You know, it's so high cost of living. People can work 2 minimum wage jobs and still not make enough money for the minimum basic needs of their family. So they can't be home when their kid comes home. It's a single mother, they take home and they check home and things like that. And the kids are often taken in by their peer group because we don't have recreation. So it's those more robust stories that I'm really interested in. And the second part of your question?
What are some specific stories which we're being told that aren't? Are there specific issues that haven't been covered?
A lot of my frustration often is that we find that we have to educate the ledger as we go with it on complex issues. And so we sometimes to our discredit, like our previous mayor was balancing budget after budget on non-recurring revenue, which just left me with a structural budget deficit of over $150 million on a $700 million budget, which is unconscionable. I'm still not sure. We're going to have to use one hell of an imagination to get out of it. So we sat at the ledge to try to explain to them all about budgeting and all that. And so this time we passed the budget this year, no increase in taxes, and the lead of their story was, Mayor passed his budget on non-reoccurring revenue. And I'm like, we never called the previous administration on that, and as opposed to going into some of the nuances. So I think that the most important story in America right now, the most important story is where this country is not being made real, made manifest. And I wish that there was a more of a statewide focus. Here we have the most affluent state in itself on what are the real root causes to these problems. I don't think the ledger's really gotten as deep as I'd like to see them in getting into the story. Now, do they sell in a competitive world where our market, where our media is becoming so market-driven and there's sort of a race to the bottom line, so to speak? I'm not sure, but I think that we're going to try to make the stories interesting enough that people will focus on. Yes?
Thanks so much for coming in. When I watched Street Fight, one of the things that really struck me about your 2002 race was that your opponents would refer to you as not being black.
Yes.
And I come from another town that was devastated by riots in 1967. I'm from the suburbs of Detroit. And I left 7 years ago to come to Yale. I was here for undergrad. I'm now in my last year of law school. And I never imagined that I wasn't going to go back when I left. I was sure I was going to come back. I came back for my first couple summers.
Do they say you're not black when you go back?
That's because I come from the suburbs. And, I'm in a relatively wealthy Jewish suburb of Detroit, and I never imagined, but I realized that, the good mayor that Detroit had when I left was slowly driven out of office because he worked with the suburbs and people said that he was too in line with white interests. And I just couldn't imagine how, as a white kid from the suburbs, I could really have the sort of authenticity to make the kind of changes that Detroit needed to work for those kind of changes. And so next year I'm not going back to Detroit after I graduate.
Because you're going to Newark?
Long line of and I wanted to know sort of what you thought the role was, what you thought kids could do who have the same vision of the United States and what it should be, but can't go into the guts of a big city and do something about it.
Okay, well, first there's this idea, this whole "what not black enough" thing that's coming out now in the national campaign in regards to Obama. These whole calls for racial, the idea that this kind of racial essentialism flies in the face of any culture or any race, to not understand that there is a diversity within those groups, and there's so many ways to manifest it. Look, Skip Gates talked about, he goes, I love being black, I luxuriate in, I immerse myself in all this. Black is always a deeper portal to have a more nuanced and profound understanding of what it means to be human. And the black experience to me has been so dynamic, has been so unpredictable, it's so very diverse, and that's what makes it so delicious. Culinary climax in a world that's starving for authenticity and real prophetic love. So to me, that's what I understand the African American culture to be. So I'm sort of delighting that Obama now has complicated the race, so to speak, in one race and one, pun intended, because it's such an important thing that we as a nation begin to get over this convenient ideas about what it means to be X, black, white, Jewish, Latino, and so on and so forth. And we need to have much more complicated, nuanced understandings of those things because it better is going to embolden us and who we are as a country. I really reject this idea that because of the race that you are, there's certain areas you can't go. And I've seen it in Europe. And granted, we have a majority minority city, 52% black, 35% Latino, and I am very focused and conscious of race. And you have to be, and anybody who is race-facing to be is contributing to a lot of the problems. You have to understand that when you have a state like New Jersey, 14% of the population is black, and over 60% of the prison population is African American. You can't ignore our racial realities. But to me, that does not mean that if you have a goodwill and a good heart, that you can't be a profound, make a profound difference. We have a kid who graduated from UPenn, a white Jewish kid who's probably one of the most, now 23 years old, and is now risen to my senior staff because he's brilliant and an incredible contributor to our team, and has now got street cred that I wish I had in my 2002 election because I never won. So it doesn't really matter. And I think your point that you made in your question is so true. You know, King said it so much more eloquently. I put in letters from Birmingham jail. We all live in an inescapable network of mutuality, retirement, common environment, destiny. And so we need each other, and justice anywhere is present justice everywhere. So we desperately need each other, and this particularism which we're governing our country these days, and these invisible lines that seem to separate us, are only helping us to fall at the lowest common denominator as opposed to rise as a nation. So I hope that you reconsider the geographical decisions that you're making, especially if they're based on how you think it would be greeted, because I know that pure, authentic love is always embraced in the end. It may take a while, but it's always embraced. Yes?
Thank you again for coming.
You know, I'm not going to indulge in maybe rhetoric to talk about the nullification disorder in the 60s and how multiple people might be trying to nullify federal laws. But I say this constantly to my citizens. I said, I don't know whether you're a citizen of the United States or not, you're a citizen of New York in my eyes. And we are trying to do things to protect immigrants from rampant abuse around our city. So I'm not familiar with what's happening on the federal level. It's not an issue I'm following closely. And I know in conversations with local leaders that have become friends and allies of mine, they've often put us in awkward positions. And I just am very affirmative in my idea of America. And whether that's in concert with the rules, I took very, give us your tired, your poor, your heart of masses, yearning to be free. To me, this is what America stands for. So in my city, the abuses are unbelievable from owners who are building, contracting, who hire workers, who don't pay them prevailing wages, who in many ways undermine and assault their dignity of those people. And I'm going to do everything I can from my position to do something about it. And that said, looking for people who will help us with immigration law on the local level is always something we do.
Mr. President, has there been a formal measure passed in City Council, or have you issued some sort of decree or?
Nothing more than my rhetoric, and one of my deputy mayors who's very focused on the issue is doing something. My city council, we're working to get, I see the other city council affirming the Kyoto Accords and all this kind of stuff. We're literally just trying to dig ourselves out in this first 7 months of just the basic blocking and tackling. But if you know of anything, I'd be curious to see resolutions of importance in other cities. Yes.